The autumn morning sun filtered through the sheer curtains of Sarah Mitchell's Chicago apartment, casting golden streaks across the hardwood floor where she sat cross-legged, surrounded by boxes of old photographs. October in Chicago always brought a bittersweet nostalgia, the kind that made her think of home, of maple trees turning crimson, and of the family she'd left behind in small-town Ohio 15 years ago. Sarah's fingers trembled slightly as she reached for the cream-colored envelope that had arrived the day before. The familiar handwriting on the front made her heart skip, her brother Michael's careful script, the same penmanship that used to help her with homework when they were kids. The return address confirmed what she already knew: Millfield, Ohio. Home. She'd been planning to attend their 20-year high school reunion for months, had even bought a new dress, a sophisticated navy blue number that she hoped would show everyone how well she'd done for herself in the big city. As a successful marketing director at a prestigious firm, she wanted to prove that leaving Millfield hadn't been a mistake. But as she tore open the envelope, her world tilted. "Sarah, I know you're planning to come back for the reunion. I can't stop you, but I need you to know you're not welcome here anymore. What you did to this family, to Mom and Dad's memory, to all of us, some things can't be forgiven. Don't come expecting hugs and catching up. Don't come expecting to pretend like nothing happened. You made your choice 15 years ago when you walked away from us, when you chose your career over family, when you weren't here when Dad had his heart attack, when you missed Mom's funeral because of some important presentation. The whole town knows what kind of person you really are. Stay in Chicago, where you belong. Michael." The letter fluttered to the floor as Sarah's hands went numb. Outside, the Chicago traffic hummed its usual morning symphony, but inside her apartment, silence pressed against her eardrums like deep water. She stared at the photographs scattered around her, images of family barbecues, Christmas mornings, graduation days. All moments that now felt like they belonged to someone else's life. Her phone buzzed. A text from her best friend Emma. "Can't wait to see you at the reunion tonight. It's been too long since you've been home." Home. The word felt foreign now, like trying on clothes that no longer fit. Sarah stood on shaking legs and walked to her bathroom mirror. At 38, she still looked good, her auburn hair perfectly styled, her green eyes usually bright with ambition. But today, those eyes reflected something she hadn't seen in years: vulnerability. Raw, exposed vulnerability. She thought about her parents. Her father, Robert Mitchell, had been the town's beloved high school principal for 30 years. Her mother, Linda, had run the local library and organized every charity event in Millfield. They'd been pillars of the community, and Sarah had always felt the weight of their expectations. The day she'd left for Chicago, fresh out of college with a communications degree, her father had said, "Don't forget where you come from, sweetheart. Success means nothing if you leave your roots behind." But Chicago had been intoxicating. The opportunities, the culture, the chance to be someone bigger than small-town Sarah Mitchell. She'd thrown herself into her career with the kind of intensity that left little room for anything else, including the 5-hour drive back to Millfield. The missed calls had started innocuously enough. "Just checking in," her mother would say. "When are you coming home for a visit?" Then they became more urgent. "Your father's been having chest pains. The doctor wants to run some tests. Sarah, please call us back." But she'd been in the middle of the biggest campaign of her career, a national account that could make her reputation. She'd promised herself she'd call back after the presentation, after the client meeting, after the proposal was submitted. There was always an after. The call about her father's heart attack had come on a Tuesday morning. She'd been in a conference room, pitching to executives, when her phone had buzzed repeatedly. She'd silenced it, focused on her slides, on making her mark. By the time she'd checked her messages, it was too late. Robert Mitchell had died on the way to the hospital. She'd made it back for the funeral, but barely. Her flight had been delayed, and she'd arrived just as they were lowering the casket into the ground. Michael had looked at her across the grave with eyes that held no forgiveness, only disappointment so deep it had its own gravity. Her mother had lived another 3 years, but something had broken in Linda Mitchell when her husband died. Maybe it was grief. Maybe it was the realization that her daughter had chosen ambition over family. Sarah had visited twice in those 3 years. Quick weekend trips filled with stilted conversations and the weight of everything left unsaid. The call about her mother's death had been different. Michael had been brief, almost businesslike. "Mom passed this morning. Funeral is Saturday. I assume you'll want to know." But Sarah had been in London, closing a deal that would secure her promotion to senior director. She'd tried to change her flight, had spent hours on the phone with airlines, but a massive storm had grounded everything. She'd missed her mother's funeral entirely. The guilt had been crushing. She'd sent flowers, expensive ones, and a donation to the library in her mother's name. But flowers couldn't replace presents. Money couldn't buy back missed moments. Now, staring at Michael's letter, Sarah felt the full weight of 15 years of choices. She thought about her siblings. Michael, who'd stayed in Millfield and taken over their father's construction business. Her younger sister, Amy, who'd become a teacher at their old elementary school. Her baby brother, Jake, who'd married his high school sweetheart and was raising 3 kids just 2 streets away from where they'd grown up. They'd all stayed. They'd all been there for the important moments, the difficult times, the gradual decline of their parents. They'd been a family while she'd been building a career. Her laptop sat open on her kitchen counter, her resignation letter half finished. She'd been planning to quit her job, to take some time to figure out what really mattered. The reunion had seemed like the perfect opportunity to reconnect, to maybe find a way back to the person she used to be before ambition had consumed everything else. But Michael's letter had made one thing clear: there might not be a way back. Sarah picked up her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found Dr. Margaret Chen, her therapist. They'd been working together for 6 months, ever since Sarah had realized that success felt hollow when you had no one to share it with. "Sarah, you're not scheduled until Wednesday." Dr. Chen's warm voice came through the speaker. "I know, but something's happened. I got a letter from my brother and I don't know what to do. Can you tell me about it?" Sarah read the letter aloud, her voice breaking on the words about her parents. When she finished, silence stretched between them. "How are you feeling right now?" Dr. Chen asked gently. "Like I deserve this. Like maybe Michael's right and I shouldn't go back." "Sarah, we've talked about guilt and self-punishment. What would you tell a friend who was in your situation?" The question hung in the air. Sarah walked to her window and looked out at the Chicago skyline, at the city that had given her everything she thought she wanted. "I'd tell them that everyone makes mistakes, that relationships can be repaired if both people are willing to try. And do you believe that applies to you too?" Sarah closed her eyes. "I want to, but what if it's too late? What if I've hurt them too badly? The only way to find out is to try. But Sarah, you need to be prepared that healing takes time. It might not happen at a high school reunion. It might take years of consistent effort." After hanging up, Sarah sat in her living room, surrounded by the trappings of her successful life. Awards on the walls, expensive furniture, a view that people paid premium rent to enjoy. But it all felt empty, like a beautiful museum exhibit behind velvet ropes. Impressive, but untouchable. She thought about her high school friends, people she'd lost touch with as her career had demanded more and more of her time. Emma, who'd been texting her for weeks about the reunion. Tom Bradley, her old debate partner, who'd become a lawyer and stayed in Ohio. Jennifer Walsh, who'd been valedictorian and was now apparently a nurse at Millfield General. These were people who'd known her before she'd become Sarah Mitchell, marketing executive. They'd known Sarah, who wrote poetry, who volunteered at the animal shelter, who dreamed of traveling the world, but also of coming home to raise her own children in the same small town where she'd grown up. Her phone rang. Emma's name flashed on the screen. "Hey, girl, I just wanted to confirm you're still driving down today. The reunion starts at 7, but a bunch of us are meeting at Murphy's Pub at 5 for pre-drinks. It's going to be so good to see you." Sarah hesitated. "Emma, there might be some complications." "What kind of complications? Don't tell me you're bailing on us after all these years." "It's my family. Things have been difficult since my parents died." Emma's voice softened. "Oh, honey, I heard about your mom. I'm so sorry. I sent a card, but I wasn't sure if you got it." "You sent a card? To your brother's house. I figured he'd pass it along." Sarah felt another stab of realization. How many other gestures of sympathy had Michael filtered out? How many people had tried to reach her, only to have their efforts stopped by her brother's protective anger? "Sarah, your family loves you. Yes, things have been hard, but you're still family. Michael's just hurt. We all understand why you couldn't make it back as much as you wanted to. Do you? Because I'm not sure I understand it myself anymore. You were building a life, following your dreams. There's nothing wrong with that." But as Sarah looked around her empty apartment, she wondered if that was really what she'd been doing, or if she'd simply been running away from the messiness of real life, from the vulnerability of staying connected to people who could hurt you. "I'll see you tonight," she heard herself saying. "I need to face this." After hanging up, Sarah walked to her closet and pulled out the navy dress. It looked different now, not like armor to impress her old classmates, but like a costume for a play she wasn't sure she wanted to perform in anymore. She had 8 hours to decide who she wanted to be when she walked into that reunion. The successful Sarah who'd conquered Chicago, or the broken Sarah who'd lost her family in the process of finding herself. Outside, Chicago hummed with its usual energy, but Sarah felt suspended between two worlds, the life she'd built and the life she'd left behind. Somewhere in Ohio, her siblings were probably preparing for the reunion too, maybe discussing whether she'd actually show up, maybe hoping she wouldn't. But Sarah knew she had to go back. Not for the reunion, not to prove anything to her old classmates, but because some conversations couldn't happen over the phone or through angry letters. Some apologies required looking someone in the eye and accepting whatever came next. She folded Michael's letter carefully and put it in her purse. Tonight she would carry it with her into her past, hoping it might somehow help her find a way toward a different future. The road home was calling, even if home didn't want her back. The rental car smelled like artificial pine and other people's lives. Sarah adjusted the rearview mirror and caught a glimpse of her own eyes, red-rimmed from crying, but determined. The Chicago skyline grew smaller in her rear window as she merged onto I-65 South, beginning the 5-hour journey that would take her back to a place that felt both intimately familiar and utterly foreign. She'd made this drive dozens of times in college, but it had been nearly 3 years since her last trip to Millfield. As the urban landscape gave way to farmland and small towns, Sarah felt layers of her carefully constructed Chicago persona beginning to peel away like old paint. Her phone, mounted on the dashboard, showed a playlist she'd created years ago called Road Trip Home, songs from high school, college, the soundtrack to a simpler version of herself. But when Fleetwood Mac's Landslide came on, her mother's favorite song, she had to pull over at a rest stop near Crawfordsville, Indiana, to compose herself. Sitting in the parking lot, watching families with small children pile out of minivans, Sarah realized she couldn't remember the last time she'd cried this much. In Chicago, tears were a luxury she couldn't afford. They smudged makeup, made eyes puffy before important meetings, suggested weakness in a world that rewarded only strength. Her phone buzzed with a work email. Marcus, her assistant, reminding her about Monday's client presentation. The ordinary demand of her professional life felt surreal against the backdrop of her current emotional crisis. She started to type a response, then stopped. For once, work could wait. Instead, she scrolled through her contacts and found a number she hadn't called in over a year. Amy, her younger sister, the teacher, the one who'd always been the peacemaker in their family. If anyone might be willing to listen, it would be Amy. The phone rang 4 times before a familiar voice answered, though it sounded more mature, more tired than Sarah remembered. "Sarah, Is that really you? Hi, Amy. I'm driving down for the reunion. A long pause. Michael said you might not come. Michael made it pretty clear I shouldn't come. Another pause, longer this time. Sarah could hear children's voices in the background, and her heart clenched as she remembered that Amy had 2 kids now, a 6-year-old daughter named Lily and a 3-year-old son named Sam. Children Sarah had met exactly twice. Where are you now? Amy asked, her voice carefully neutral. Indiana, about 3 hours out. Sarah? Amy's voice dropped to a whisper, and Sarah imagined her walking to another room, away from small ears. Things have been really hard since Mom died. Michael's been angry at everyone, but especially at you. I tried to be there for the funeral, the flights. I know. Michael knows too, deep down, but grief makes people need someone to blame, and you're the easiest target because you're not here to defend yourself. Sarah felt tears threatening again. Do you blame me too? The question hung in the air between them. In the background, Sarah could hear her nephew Sam calling for his mama, his voice sweet and innocent, oblivious to the adult pain being discussed in hushed tones. I miss you, Amy said finally. We all do, even Michael, though he'd never admit it. But Sarah, I can't lie to you. It's going to be hard tonight. A lot of people have opinions about your absence. Small towns remember everything. Maybe I should just turn around. No, Amy's voice was suddenly fierce. Don't you dare. We've lost too much already. I won't lose my big sister too. Big sister. Sarah hadn't heard those words in years. Amy had been 8 when Sarah left for college, 14 when she moved to Chicago. In many ways, Sarah had missed watching her little sister grow up, become a woman, a mother, a pillar of strength for their fractured family. Amy, I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to come home to people who hate me. They don't hate you, they're hurt. There's a difference. Is there? Yes. Hate doesn't cry itself to sleep. Hate doesn't keep your picture on the mantle. Hate doesn't ask about you every time someone mentions Chicago. Sarah's breath caught. Michael asks about me? Michael Googles your company. He knows about your promotions, your awards. He pretends he doesn't care, but he keeps track. We all do. The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. All this time, she'd assumed her family had written her off, moved on without her. The possibility that they'd been quietly following her life from afar was almost too much to bear. Can I see you tonight? Before the reunion? I'll be there. Jake too. We're not going to let you face this alone. After hanging up, Sarah sat in the rental car for another 10 minutes, watching strangers come and go. An elderly couple sharing coffee from a thermos. A young mother changing a baby's diaper in the back of an SUV while a toddler danced around her legs. A teenage boy helping his grandfather walk slowly across the parking lot. Families, people who showed up for each other, who navigated the messy complexity of love and obligation and forgiveness. People who didn't let career ambitions override every other consideration. Sarah started the car and pulled back onto the highway. The landscape was changing now, becoming more familiar. Rolling hills dotted with farmhouses, barns with faded mail pouch tobacco advertisements painted on their sides. Small towns with water towers proclaiming their names in block letters. She passed through Seymour, where she and Michael had once stopped for ice cream on a family road trip. Through Columbus, where her parents had taken them to buy school clothes every August. Each mile brought her closer to a reckoning she'd been avoiding for 15 years. Her phone rang. Emma again. Hey, where are you? We're all gathering at Murphy's in an hour. I'm about 2 hours out. Emma, I need to ask you something. What are people saying about me? About my family situation? Emma was quiet for a moment. Honestly? People are curious. You were class president, valedictorian, voted most likely to succeed. Everyone wanted to see how you turned out. And now? Now they're going to see that success came with a price. But Sarah, that doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you human. Michael doesn't see it that way. Michael's dealing with his own stuff. Did you know he got divorced last year? Sarah nearly swerved. What? He was divorced. Messy divorce. His ex-wife took the kids to Indianapolis. He's been pretty bitter about everything since then. I think losing his parents and then his family, It's made him look for someone to blame. Another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Michael's anger wasn't just about Sarah's absence. It was about his own losses, his own feelings of abandonment and failure. She'd been a convenient target for pain that ran much deeper than her missed funerals and delayed phone calls. As she drove through the small town of Franklin, Sarah remembered a conversation she'd had with her father during her last visit home. He'd been in his workshop, building a birdhouse, his hands steady despite his age. "You know, sweetheart," he'd said without looking up from his work, "success means different things to different people. For some, it's money and titles and corner offices. For others, it's raising good kids and being there when people need you. Neither one's wrong, but you can't have everything. Life makes you choose." At the time, she'd bristled at what felt like a criticism of her choices. Now she wondered if he'd been trying to prepare her for exactly this moment. The realization that some choices couldn't be undone, but they could be faced with honesty and grace. The GPS announced she was 30 minutes from Millfield, 30 minutes from facing the consequences of 15 years of prioritizing her career over her relationships. 30 minutes from seeing Michael's anger up close, from hugging Amy for the first time in 3 years, from walking into a room full of people who knew exactly who she used to be and who she'd become. She passed the old covered bridge where she and her high school boyfriend used to meet, past the farm where she'd worked summers during college, baling hay and learning that physical exhaustion could be oddly satisfying, past the cemetery where her parents were buried, their graves probably still tended by Michael and Amy, probably decorated with flowers Sarah hadn't sent. The guilt was overwhelming, but underneath it, Sarah felt something else: determination. She couldn't change the past, couldn't bring back her parents or undo her absences, but she could show up now. She could face the disappointment and anger and hurt she'd caused. She could start the long process of rebuilding bridges she'd allowed to burn. Her phone rang one more time. An unknown local number. "Hello? Sarah, it's Tom Bradley. Emma gave me your number." Tom, her old debate partner, the boy who'd helped her prepare for speech competitions, who'd walked her to her locker every day junior year, who'd been her first real crush before they'd decided they were better as friends. "Tom, how are you?" "I'm good. Married, 2 kids, practicing law here in town. Listen, I heard you were coming tonight, and I wanted you to know, well, not everyone feels the way Michael does. A lot of us are excited to see you." "Really? Really? You were our superstar, Sarah, the one who got out, who made it big. Yes, some people have opinions about your family stuff, but others understand that life is complicated, that sometimes good people make hard choices. I don't feel like a good person right now. Maybe that's because you are one. Bad people don't lose sleep over their mistakes." As Sarah topped the hill that led into Millfield, she could see the town spread out below her like a miniature train set. The water tower, the grain elevator, the steeple of First Methodist Church, where she'd been baptized. Main Street with its mix of thriving businesses and empty storefronts. The high school with its football field, where she'd given her graduation speech 17 years ago. Home. Complicated, judgmental, loving, unforgiving home. She drove slowly down Main Street, past Murphy's pub where she could see cars already gathering for the pre-reunion meetup, past the library where her mother had worked, past her father's old construction office, now bearing Michael's name on the sign. At the red light by the courthouse, she saw a familiar figure walking across the street. Michael, looking older and more weathered than she remembered, his shoulders set in the rigid posture of a man carrying too much weight. He didn't see her, but Sarah's heart clenched at the sight of her big brother, the one who'd taught her to ride a bike and helped her with algebra and walked her down the aisle at her college friend's wedding when their father had been too sick to travel. The light turned green, and Sarah drove toward the Millfield Motor Lodge, the only hotel in town where she'd booked a room. She had 3 hours before the reunion officially started. 3 hours to shower, change, and prepare herself for the most difficult evening of her adult life. In her hotel room, small, clean, decorated with photos of local landmarks, Sarah laid out her navy dress and stared at it. This morning in Chicago, it had seemed like the perfect choice. Now it looked like what it was, an expensive piece of armor chosen by someone trying to prove she'd outgrown her origins. Instead, she pulled out a simple black dress she'd packed as backup. Elegant, but not showy, appropriate, but not intimidating. The kind of dress worn by someone coming home to ask for forgiveness, not to prove a point. As she got ready, Sarah thought about the conversations ahead, the careful small talk with classmates who knew her history, the inevitable questions about her job, her personal life, her long absence, the moment when she'd have to look Michael in the eye and find words for 15 years of mutual hurt and disappointment. But mostly, she thought about Amy's words. They don't hate you. They're hurt. There's a difference. Tonight, Sarah would find out if hurt could be healed, if bridges could be rebuilt, if coming home was still possible for someone who'd spent so many years running away. The reunion was scheduled to start in 2 hours. The reckoning she'd been avoiding for half her adult life would begin in just a little while. Sarah Mitchell was finally coming home. Murphy's Pub hadn't changed in 20 years, except for the flat-screen TVs and the credit card reader at the bar. The same red vinyl booths, the same neon beer signs, the same jukebox that still played half the songs from their high school years. Walking through the door felt like stepping into a time machine, one that transported Sarah back to weekend nights when their biggest worry was making curfew. The buzz of conversation dimmed slightly when she entered, then resumed with the particular intensity of people trying not to stare while absolutely staring. Sarah recognized faces immediately, fuller, lined with years of experience, but fundamentally unchanged. Emma waved from a corner booth, her smile bright and welcoming, surrounded by women Sarah remembered as the good kids, the ones who'd gone to college, gotten married, settled into responsible adult lives. "Sarah!" Emma jumped up and enveloped her in a hug that smelled like vanilla perfume and felt like safety. "You look amazing. Chicago's been good to you." The other women chorused greetings, and Sarah found herself surrounded by faces she'd once known better than her own reflection. Jennifer Walsh, former valedictorian, now apparently head nurse at the county hospital. Lisa Morrison, who'd been captain of the volleyball team and was now married to the town's pediatrician. Melissa Carter, who'd struggled through calculus with Sarah's help and was now, improbably, a CPA with her own firm. "So tell us everything," Jennifer said, sliding over to make room in the booth. "We've been following your career online, marketing director at Hartwell and Associates. That's huge." "Senior director now, actually," Sarah said, then immediately wished she hadn't. It sounded like bragging, like proving exactly what Michael accused her of, that her career mattered more than anything else. "That's incredible," Lisa said genuinely. "Remember when you did that presentation on environmental awareness junior year? You had the whole school convinced to start recycling programs. I always knew you'd do something big with that talent." The conversation flowed around Sarah like warm water. These women who'd known her when she was 17 and awkward and full of dreams she could barely articulate. They talked about their jobs, their children, their parents aging, their own aging, normal life, the kind Sarah had observed from a distance for years without really participating in. "Kids?" Melissa asked, the inevitable question every woman over 30 fielded at high school reunions. "No, not yet. The career's been pretty demanding." Sarah's standard answer, delivered with a smile that had grown more forced over the years. "There's still time," Emma said gently. "Though I have to warn you, once you start, you can't imagine life without them. My oldest just started middle school, and I swear she's already smarter than me." Sarah smiled and nodded, but inside she felt the familiar ache. There's still time. Everyone always said that, but at 38, with no serious relationship and a career that consumed 60-hour weeks, time felt less abundant than it once had. "Sarah?" A male voice interrupted her thoughts. She looked up to see Tom Bradley approaching their table, looking remarkably like the boy she'd once known, but filled out, confident, wearing a wedding ring and the easy smile of a man comfortable with his life choices. Tom! She stood for another hug, this one bringing back sense memories of high school dances and study sessions, and the comfortable friendship they'd maintained until college pulled them in different directions. "Can I steal her for a minute?" Tom asked the group. "I want to introduce her to my wife." Sarah followed Tom to the bar, where a petite blonde woman was talking animatedly with Jake, her baby brother, now 33, and looking so much like their father it made Sarah's chest tight. "Sarah, this is my wife, Michelle, and you remember Jake." Michelle's handshake was firm, her smile genuine. "I've heard so many stories about you. Tom says you two were going to change the world through the power of persuasive argument." We thought we were pretty smart," Sarah agreed, but her attention was focused on Jake, who was looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Not Michael's anger, but not Amy's warmth either. Something more complicated. "Hey, sis," Jake said, and pulled her into a hug that felt tentative, careful, like embracing someone who might disappear again without warning. "You're so tall," Sarah said stupidly, though Jake had been 6'2" since high school. It was just that in her memory, he was still the gangly teenager who'd wanted to tag along with her and her friends, who'd looked up to her with uncomplicated adoration. "Kids do that," Jake said with a slight smile. "Grow up, I mean." The comment stung because it was true, and because it wasn't really about physical growth. Jake had grown up, had become a man, a husband, a father, while Sarah had been busy becoming successful. She'd missed the gradual transformation, the important moments, the slow accumulation of experiences that turned her baby brother into this adult stranger who shared her DNA, but not her recent history. "How are your kids?" Sarah asked. "I'd love to meet them sometime." "They're good. Emma's 7 now, starting 2nd grade. Michael Jr. is 5, starting kindergarten next week." He paused, then added with pointed emphasis, "They don't really know they have an aunt in Chicago." The words were delivered quietly, without malice, but they hit Sarah like a physical blow. Her niece and nephew, children who shared her bloodline, didn't know she existed in any meaningful way. She was a name occasionally mentioned, maybe a birthday card that arrived late, but not a real presence in their lives. "Jake," she started, but he was already turning away. "I should get back to Amy. She's at home with the kids, waiting to see if you'll stop by." He paused at the bar's entrance. "You should know, Sarah. Amy's been the one holding this family together since Mom died. She's been taking care of everyone, including Michael. Don't hurt her more than you already have." And then he was gone, leaving Sarah standing with Tom and Michelle, feeling like she'd been slapped. "He's protective," Tom said quietly. "They all are. Amy especially has been through a lot." "What do you mean?" Tom and Michelle exchanged a look. "Maybe that's not my story to tell. But Sarah, your family, they've had some hard years. Your parents' deaths were just the beginning." Before Sarah could ask what he meant, Emma appeared at her elbow. "Everything okay? You look pale." "Fine. Just catching up." But Sarah wasn't fine. The conversation with Jake had crystallized something she'd been avoiding. Her absence hadn't just hurt her immediate family. It had ripple effects she'd never considered. Children who didn't know their aunt. Siblings who'd had to manage family crises without her. Support. Responsibilities and burdens that should have been shared among 4 siblings, but had fallen to 3. The pub was filling up now. More familiar faces arriving for the pre-reunion gathering. Sarah found herself in conversation after conversation, answering the same questions, offering the same carefully edited version of her life. Yes, Chicago was wonderful. Yes, her job was challenging and rewarding. No, she wasn't married yet. Yes, she was happy. That last answer felt more false each time she said it. "Sarah Mitchell!" A booming voice cut through the crowd. She turned to see Coach Harrison, her old speech and debate coach, now retired but still built like the linebacker he'd been in college. "There's my star pupil. I've been following your career, young lady, making us all proud." Coach Harrison. Sarah felt genuine warmth for the first time all evening. This man had believed in her when she was an awkward teenager with big dreams and no clear path toward achieving them. He taught her to speak with confidence, to argue with passion, to believe she could persuade anyone of anything, if she prepared well enough. You know, I still use your speech about environmental responsibility in my classes. Well, I did until I retired last year. 23 years I taught speech, and yours was still the standard I held everyone else to. Thank you. That means a lot. But tell me, Sarah, are you using that talent for good? Are you making the world better or just making money? The question was asked kindly, but it cut deep. Sarah thought about her current clients. A fast food chain trying to market processed food as healthy. A pharmaceutical company launching a lifestyle drug for a condition most people didn't know they had. A fashion retailer promoting fast fashion while claiming to care about sustainability. I'm working on that balance, she said finally. Coach Harrison studied her face with the intensity that had once made her squirm during practice sessions. You know, Sarah, success isn't just about reaching your goals. It's about making sure your goals are worth reaching. Before she could respond, the coach was pulled away by another former student, leaving Sarah alone with his words echoing in her head. The crowd in Murphy's was thinning as people headed to the high school for the official reunion. Sarah looked around for Amy, hoping her sister had arrived, but saw only Jake's retreating figure through the window. Amy wasn't coming to Murphy's, she realized. She was waiting at home, giving Sarah the choice of whether to bridge that gap. Ready to head over? Emma asked, appearing with her purse and keys. Actually, I think I need to make a stop first. Can you give me Amy's address? Emma smiled, the first completely unguarded smile Sarah had seen from anyone all evening. Of course. She's hoping you'll come by. As Sarah walked to her rental car, her phone buzzed with a text from her assistant in Chicago. Henderson meeting moved to 9 a.m. Monday. Need your approval on the Morrison revisions tonight. Sarah stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. For the first time in her professional life, work could wait. She had family to see, relationships to repair, bridges to build. Amy lived on Maple Street, just 6 blocks from their childhood home. The house was a small craftsman bungalow with a front porch swing and flower boxes under the windows. Toys scattered across the front yard, a tricycle overturned on the sidewalk, the unmistakable signs of a life centered around children and family. Sarah sat in her car for a moment, gathering courage. Through the front window, she could see warm yellow light and the flicker of what looked like a television. Normal family life happening behind those walls. The kind of life she'd always assumed she'd have someday after she'd achieved enough professional success to feel secure. The front door opened before Sarah could knock, and Amy appeared in the doorway. At 35, she looked like their mother had at the same age. Soft brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, wearing jeans and a sweater that had seen better days, flour dusting her hands from what was probably homemade cookies or bread. She looked tired, but beautiful in the way of women who'd found their purpose and were living it fully. "Hi," Amy said simply, and Sarah heard 15 years of separation in that single word. "Hi yourself." Sarah's voice came out rougher than she intended. "Can I come in?" "Of course. The kids are already in their pajamas, but they're still up if you want to meet them." The living room was everything Sarah's sterile Chicago apartment wasn't. Lived in, comfortable, full of the beautiful chaos that came with small children. Crayons scattered across a coffee table, picture books stacked on every surface, a basket of laundry waiting to be folded. Family photos covered the mantel and side tables, documenting birthdays and holidays, and ordinary moments that someone had deemed worth preserving. Sarah's eyes caught on a photo she hadn't expected to see. Herself, arms around Amy at Amy's college graduation. Sarah remembered that day, had driven down from Chicago specially for the ceremony. It had been one of the last times they'd been together before their parents' deaths had complicated everything. "Mama, who's that?" A small voice piped up from the hallway, and Sarah turned to see a little girl with Amy's brown hair and eyes that looked remarkably like their father's. This was Lily, 6 years old, studying Sarah with the frank curiosity of childhood. "This is your Aunt Sarah," Amy said gently. "She lives in Chicago, remember? The big city we talk about sometimes." Lily stepped closer, unafraid. You're really tall, and you smell like flowers." Sarah laughed, despite the emotional weight of the moment. "Thank you. I think you're very pretty, just like your mama." "I can read now," Lily announced, apparently deciding Sarah was worth impressing. "Want me to show you?" "I'd love that." For the next 20 minutes, Sarah found herself sitting on Amy's couch, listening to her niece read from a picture book about a mouse who wanted to be brave. Lily leaned against Sarah's arm as she read, casual and trusting in the way children could be before the world taught them to be careful with their affections. 3-year-old Sam appeared halfway through the book, pajama-clad and rubbing sleepy eyes. He was shyer than his sister, hanging back and studying this strange aunt who'd materialized in their living room. But when Sarah offered to read the next book, he climbed onto the couch beside her, his small body warm against her side. "Aunt Sarah has to go soon," Amy said gently when they'd finished 3 books. "Say goodnight and get ready for bed." Lily hugged Sarah tightly, and Sam, not to be outdone by his sister, wrapped his small arms around her neck with the fierce affection of a 3-year-old. "Will you come back?" Lily asked, and the question pierced Sarah's heart. "I hope so, sweetie. I really hope so." The day after the children had been tucked into bed, Sarah and Amy sat in the kitchen over cups of coffee that Amy had brewed too strong, the way their mother always had. The silence between them was heavy with unspoken words, years of hurt and misunderstanding, and love that had never quite died despite the distance. "They're beautiful," Sarah said finally. "Your kids. They're lucky to have you. They're good kids. Lily's going to be just like you were, smart, determined, probably too stubborn for her own good. Sam's more like Dad was, quiet but observant. He sees everything. Amy, I'm sorry for missing so much of their lives, for not being here when you needed support. I'm sorry for all of it." Amy looked down at her coffee cup, and Sarah saw tears threatening. "Do you know what the hardest part was? When Mum was dying, she kept asking for you. Not at the end, she was too sick then, but in those last few months. She'd call your name when she was confused, when the medication made her think you were still in high school. I had to keep explaining that you were in Chicago, that you couldn't come right then." Sarah felt like she was drowning. "Amy, I'm not telling you this to hurt you. I'm telling you because you need to know that your absence had consequences, real ones. Mum died thinking you didn't care enough to come see her." "Odidi, that's not true. I cared. I thought I had more time. I thought there would always be another chance." "I know, but thinking you have time and actually having it are 2 different things." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of missed opportunities settling between them like a physical presence. "Michael's divorce," Sarah said finally. "Jake mentioned it, but I didn't know. What happened?" Amy sighed. "Caroline got tired of playing second fiddle to his anger. That's what she told me anyway. Michael's been carrying so much resentment since Dad died, and then Mom, and then you stopped coming around entirely. He became impossible to live with, critical, bitter, always looking for someone to blame for everything that went wrong. So he blamed me. He blamed everyone, including himself. But yes, you became the symbol of everything he felt was wrong with the world. People who abandoned their responsibilities, who chose ambition over family, who thought they were too good for small-town life." Sarah felt the familiar sting of guilt, but also something else, a spark of defensiveness. "I didn't think I was too good for anything. I was trying to build a life. I know that. Jake knows that. Deep down, even Michael knows that. But knowing something intellectually and feeling it in your heart are different things. Do you hate me too?" Amy looked up, her brown eyes bright with unshed tears. "Sarah, I could never hate you. You're my big sister. You taught me how to braid my hair and helped me with algebra and drove me to prom when Mom was sick. You held me when I cried about stupid boys and cheered louder than anyone at my graduation. But I've been angry. So angry. Do you know how many times I've needed you over the last few years? When I was going through postpartum depression after Sam was born, when my marriage hit a rough patch and I didn't know if we'd make it, When I was trying to decide whether to go back to work or stay home with the kids, I wanted my big sister to talk to help me figure things out. Sarah felt tears sliding down her cheeks. Why didn't you call me? I did. You were always in meetings, always traveling, always promising to call back when things slowed down. Eventually, I stopped trying. The words hit Sarah like physical blows. She remembered those calls now. Amy's name appearing on her phone at inconvenient moments. Messages she'd meant to return, but somehow never found time for. Her sister's life had been unfolding. Challenges and joys and the million small moments that made up a real existence, and Sarah had been too busy climbing corporate ladders to participate. I'm sorry, Sarah whispered. Amy, I'm so sorry. I know you are. But Sarah, being sorry isn't enough anymore. We need to know that you're actually going to be here, that you're not going to disappear again the minute things get complicated or your job demands attention. I want to be here. I want to be part of your lives, part of the kids' lives. Sarah trailed off, not sure how to articulate what she wanted. To turn back time? To make different choices? To somehow balance the successful career she'd built with the family relationships she'd neglected? What do you want, Sarah? Really? It was a simple question, but it hit at the heart of everything Sarah had been avoiding for years. What did she want? She'd spent so long focused on what she thought she should want, the next promotion, the bigger salary, the corner office, that she'd lost touch with what actually mattered to her. I want to know my niece and nephew. I want to help you when you need support. I want to have conversations with Jake that aren't about how much I've screwed up. She paused, the words catching in her throat. I want Michael to forgive me. That last one might take time. A lot of time. I know. But Amy, I need you to know I'm not the same person I was 3 years ago. I've been seeing a therapist, trying to figure out how I got so far off track. I've been questioning everything about my life, about what success really means. Amy studied her sister's face. What's changed? I realized I was successful at everything, except the things that actually matter. I have awards on my wall and money in the bank, and a title that sounds impressive at cocktail parties. But I come home to an empty apartment every night. I eat dinner alone. I don't have anyone to share good news with or call when I'm scared. I built exactly the life I thought I wanted, and it turns out it's not enough. So what are you going to do about it? I don't know yet. I can't just quit my job and move back to Millfield, but I can't keep living the way I have been either. Something has to change. Amy reached across the table and took Sarah's hand, the first physical contact they'd had since Sarah's arrival. Her sister's hand was rougher than it used to be, marked by years of teaching and motherhood and the practical work of daily life, but it was warm and familiar and felt like coming home. You know what Mom used to say when we were kids and couldn't figure out how to solve a problem? Sarah smiled through her tears. Take it one step at a time. One step at a time, Amy repeated. You don't have to fix everything tonight, Sarah. You just have to start. They talked for another hour, filling in some of the gaps that had grown between them. Amy told her about her teaching job, about the challenges of balancing work and motherhood, about her husband David's job at the power plant, and their dreams of maybe buying a bigger house someday. Sarah talked about Chicago, about her work, about the loneliness she'd been carrying for years without fully acknowledging it. When Sarah finally stood to leave, Amy walked her to the door. Are you going to the reunion? Amy asked. I think so. I came all this way and I promised Emma I'd be there. Michael will be there. I know. He might not be ready to talk. I know that too, but I have to try. Amy hugged her then, a real embrace that lasted long enough for Sarah to remember what it felt like to be truly known by another person, to be loved despite your flaws and failures. One step at a time, Amy whispered in her ear. Sarah drove to the high school with Amy's words echoing in her mind. The parking lot was already full, cars bearing license plates from across the Midwest as classmates who'd scattered to Indianapolis, Cincinnati, Louisville, and beyond came home for one night of shared nostalgia. The school looked exactly the same. Red brick, Art Deco details, the kind of solid utilitarian building that had housed generations of small-town teenagers. Sarah had walked these halls for 4 years, had given her graduation speech on the stage she could see through the gym windows, had believed with the fierce certainty of youth that she was destined for something bigger than Millfield could contain. Now, at 38, she wondered if she'd confused bigger with better, if she'd sacrificed something essential in her quest to prove she could succeed in the wider world. Inside the gymnasium, decorations in their old school colors of blue and gold created a festive atmosphere. A DJ played hits from their high school years, while classmates clustered around tables, sharing photos on their phones, and catching up on 20 years of accumulated life experience. Sarah took a deep breath and walked through the doors, ready to face whatever came next. Somewhere in this room was Michael, carrying 15 years of anger and hurt. Somewhere were classmates who'd judge her choices and others who'd celebrate her success. Somewhere was the reckoning she'd been avoiding for far too long. But also, somewhere in this room was the possibility of redemption, of connection, of finding a way back to the person she'd been before ambition had consumed everything else. Sarah Mitchell had finally come home. Now she had to figure out how to stay. The gymnasium buzzed with the particular energy of people trying to reconcile memory with reality. Sarah stood in the doorway for a moment, taking in the scene. Her former classmates clustered around registration tables, name tags bearing senior photos that looked like artifacts from another era, a slideshow projecting images of their younger selves onto the far wall. Emma spotted her immediately and waved from across the room, but Sarah's attention was caught by a familiar figure near the back corner. Michael stood with a group of men she recognized as former football players, his posture rigid, his attention seemingly focused on anything except the entrance where Sarah lingered. He looked older than his 41 years, she realized with a pang. His dark hair was streaked with premature gray, and his face had the weathered quality of someone who worked with his hands and carried too much stress. But he was still handsome in the way their father had been. Strong jawline, intelligent eyes, the kind of presence that made people instinctively trust him to fix their problems. "Sarah!" Jennifer Walsh appeared at her elbow, name tag already perfectly placed, smile bright with genuine pleasure. "I'm so glad you made it. Come on, let's get you registered." The registration process was surreal, writing her name on a tag that would identify her to people who'd known her when she thought she'd marry her high school boyfriend and maybe teach English at the local middle school. The woman behind the table, Mrs. Patterson, who'd been their senior class sponsor, beamed at her with motherly pride. "Sarah Mitchell! Or should I say, Sarah Mitchell, Senior Marketing Director. We've all been so proud to watch your success. You were always special, even back then." The words were kind, but they made Sarah feel like she was wearing a costume. Success. That word again, wielding such power over how people saw her, how she saw herself. But after her conversation with Amy, after seeing her nephew fall asleep against her shoulder, after watching her sister navigate the beautiful complexity of family life, Sarah was beginning to question what success actually meant. "Thank you, Mrs. Patterson. It's good to be back." The next hour passed in a blur of conversations that felt both familiar and strange. Classmates who'd grown into versions of themselves she could have predicted. Lisa Morrison, still athletic and competitive, now channeling that energy into coaching her daughter's soccer team. Kevin Walsh, the class clown who'd become a surprisingly successful stand-up comedian and was regaling everyone with stories from comedy clubs in Indianapolis. Others had surprised her. Quiet David Chen, who'd barely spoken in high school, was now a confident pediatrician who'd opened his own practice and seemed completely at ease discussing his work. Popular Jessica Turner, who'd seemed destined for a glamorous life, was working as a social worker and spoke passionately about the foster care system. Everyone asked about her career, her life in Chicago, her success. The questions were well-meaning, but each one reinforced the narrative Sarah was beginning to reject, that leaving Millfield and achieving professional recognition was the highest good, that she'd won some kind of competition the rest of them had lost by staying. "So, what's next for you?" asked Mark Stevens, who'd been student body president and was now mayor of Millfield. "Senior director seems like it should lead to vice president, right? Executive level?" "I'm actually taking some time to reevaluate my priorities," Sarah said, surprising herself with the honesty. "Success isn't just about climbing the corporate ladder." Mark looked puzzled, as if he couldn't imagine why someone would question upward mobility. "But you've worked so hard to get where you are. Wouldn't it be a waste to stop now?" Before Sarah could answer, she felt a presence behind her and turned to see Tom Bradley with his wife Michelle and another couple she didn't immediately recognize. "Sarah, I'd like you to meet Dr. Patricia Hendricks and her husband James. Patricia was 2 years behind us in school, but she's done something pretty amazing." Patricia smiled, and Sarah recognized her now, a quiet girl who'd been in drama club, someone Sarah remembered as talented but shy. Now she radiated confidence and purpose. "I heard you work in marketing," Patricia said. "I could probably use someone with your skills. I run a non-profit here in town. We provide mental health services and addiction counseling. The work is rewarding, but the fundraising and public awareness side is challenging." Sarah felt a spark of interest she hadn't experienced in her professional life for months. "What kind of programs do you offer?" As Patricia described her organization's work, counseling for families affected by the opioid crisis, support groups for people dealing with depression and anxiety, programs for teenagers struggling with social media pressure and academic stress, Sarah found herself genuinely engaged in a way she hadn't been during any work conversation in recent memory. "It sounds like you're making a real difference," Sarah said. "We try, but it's hard to reach people who need help if they don't know we exist. And funding is always a challenge." Sarah was about to ask more questions when she felt someone approach from behind. She turned and found herself face to face with Michael for the first time in 3 years. Up close, the changes in her brother were even more apparent. Lines around his eyes that spoke of too much worry, a tension in his shoulders that suggested he carried the weight of other people's problems along with his own. But his eyes were the same, dark brown like their father's, intelligent and intense. "Sarah," his voice was carefully neutral, neither welcoming nor hostile, just acknowledgement. "Michael," her throat felt tight. "You look well. You too. Chicago life seems to agree with you." They stood there for a moment, siblings who'd once been close enough to communicate without words, now struggling to find anything safe to say to each other. The conversations around them continued, but Sarah felt like she and Michael existed in a bubble of tense silence. "I got your letter," Sarah said finally. "I figured you would, but you came anyway. I had to. We need to talk." Michael glanced around the crowded gymnasium. "This isn't the place." "Then when? Where?" "Michael, we can't keep avoiding each other forever." "Can't we?" His voice was bitter. "We've done a pretty good job of it for the last few years." "That's not fair." "Fair?" Michael's composure cracked slightly. "You want to talk about fair? Was it fair that Mom spent her last months asking for you? Was it fair that Jake and Amy and I had to handle everything? The medical decisions, the funeral arrangements, the estate, while you were too busy with your important job to be bothered?" People around them were starting to notice the tension. Sarah saw Emma looking concerned, saw former classmates glancing their way with the curiosity of people witnessing family drama they remembered from high school hallways. "You're right," Sarah said quietly. "It wasn't fair. None of it was fair. I made terrible choices, and I hurt all of you. But Michael, I can't change the past. I can only try to do better going forward." How do I know you won't just disappear again the minute your career demands it? How do I know this isn't just guilt talking and you'll go back to Chicago and forget about us for another 3 years? The question hung between them, and Sarah realized it was the heart of everything. Michael didn't just want an apology, he wanted assurance that she wouldn't hurt their family again. He wanted guarantees she couldn't give, promises about a future she was still figuring out. "You don't know," she said honestly. "You have to decide whether you're willing to give me a chance to prove I've changed." Before Michael could respond, the DJ interrupted with an announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a special presentation. Sarah Mitchell, your former class president and valedictorian, has agreed to say a few words about success and following your dreams." Sarah's heart sank. She hadn't agreed to any such thing, but Mrs. Patterson was already approaching with a microphone, beaming with pride and expectation. The crowd was turning toward them, applauding, expecting her to deliver some inspiring message about achieving your goals and conquering the world beyond Millfield's borders. "I can't," Sarah whispered to Michael. "I can't get up there and talk about success when my life is falling apart." For a moment, something shifted in Michael's expression. The anger faded, replaced by something that looked almost like compassion. "Then don't talk about success," he said quietly. "Talk about what matters." Mrs. Patterson pressed the microphone into Sarah's hands, and suddenly she was walking toward the small stage that had been set up near the DJ booth. The gymnasium fell quiet. 200 faces turned toward her expectantly. These were people who'd known her when she was 17 and full of certainty about her future. People who'd watched her leave and built narratives about her success from newspaper clippings and social media posts. Sarah stood at the microphone, looking out at her former classmates, and felt the weight of every choice she'd made over the past 20 years. She could deliver the speech they expected, talk about pursuing dreams, overcoming obstacles, the rewards of ambition. She could maintain the fiction that success was simply a matter of wanting something badly enough and working hard enough to achieve it. Or she could tell the truth. 20 years ago, Sarah began, her voice echoing through the gymnasium, I stood on a stage very much like this one and gave a graduation speech about following your dreams and never settling for less than you deserve. I was so sure I knew what success looked like, so confident that bigger was always better, that leaving was the only way to grow. She paused, looking out at faces she'd known since childhood, people who'd stayed and built lives in the place she'd been so eager to escape. Tonight, I want to talk about what I've learned since then, about what success actually means and what it costs, and how sometimes the things we think we want aren't the things that make us happy. She saw Michael in the crowd, his expression unreadable. Amy had arrived and was standing near the back with Jake, both of them watching her intently. Emma was near the front, nodding encouragingly. I did exactly what I said I would do 20 years ago. I moved to a big city, built a successful career, climbed the corporate ladder. By any external measure, I achieved my goals. I have the job title, the salary, the corner office. I've been featured in business magazines and won industry awards. She took a breath, her heart pounding, and I've never been more miserable in my life. A murmur ran through the crowd. This wasn't the inspiring success story they'd expected. I missed my father's heart attack because I was in a meeting I thought was more important than a phone call from home. I missed my mother's funeral because I was in London closing a deal that seemed crucial at the time, but that I can barely remember now. I've become a stranger to my siblings. My niece and nephew don't really know they have an aunt, and I couldn't tell you the last time I had a conversation with someone who cared about me as a person rather than as a professional contact. Sarah's voice was growing stronger, more certain. I thought success meant proving I was too big for a small town. I thought it meant accumulating achievements and accolades and external validation. I thought it meant independence, self-sufficiency, never needing anyone else. She looked directly at Michael. I was wrong. Success isn't about what you achieve. It's about who you become in the process of achieving it. And if you become someone who's too busy to show up for the people you love, if you become someone who mistakes activity for purpose, if you become someone who's afraid to need other people, then you haven't succeeded at anything that matters. The gymnasium was completely quiet now. Sarah could see tears in some eyes, recognition in others. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with ambition or pursuing your dreams or wanting to see what's beyond the horizon. But I am saying that success without connection, achievement without relationship, progress without purpose, it's not enough. It's not even close to enough. She thought about her conversation with Amy, about Lily reading to her, about Michael's anger and Jake's disappointment and all the years of accumulated hurt and missed opportunities. I came back tonight thinking I needed to prove something to all of you, to show you that I'd made it, that leaving was the right choice. Instead, I've realized that I need to prove something to myself, that I can still change, that I can still choose differently, that it's not too late to become the person I should have been all along. Sarah looked out at her classmates, at people who'd found ways to build meaningful lives without leaving everything behind. So this is what I want to say to anyone who's struggling with their own choices, their own definitions of success. Don't make the mistake I made. Don't assume that bigger is always better, that a way is always up, that proving yourself means abandoning the people and places that shaped you. Don't wait until you've achieved everything you thought you wanted to realize that what you actually needed was right here, all along. She paused, her eyes finding Amy's in the crowd. And if you have made that mistake, if you've lost your way the way I did, don't assume it's too late to find your way back. Relationships can be repaired, trust can be rebuilt, forgiveness can be earned, but only if you're willing to do the work, to show up consistently, to prove through actions rather than words that you've learned something from your mistakes. Sarah set the microphone down and walked off the stage to silence that stretched for what felt like an eternity. Then Emma started clapping, followed by Tom, then Patricia Hendricks, then others, until the entire gymnasium was applauding, not for her success, but for her honesty, her vulnerability, her willingness to admit that she'd gotten it wrong. People approached her afterward, some sharing their own stories of difficult choices and hard-won wisdom. A few seemed uncomfortable with her message, preferring the simpler narrative of small-town girl makes good in the big city. But many seemed grateful that someone had finally said what they'd been thinking, that success was more complicated than anyone wanted to admit, that the traditional markers of achievement didn't always correlate with happiness or fulfillment. Michael waited until the crowd around her had thinned before approaching. That was brave, he said simply. It was honest. Finally. They stood together in the gymnasium where they'd both graduated, where they'd cheered at basketball games and attended school dances and navigated the complicated social dynamics of small-town adolescence. "I'm going to quit my job," Sarah said suddenly, the decision crystallizing as she spoke. "Not right away. I'll give proper notice, finish my current projects, but I can't keep living a life that feels hollow. And then what? I don't know yet. Maybe I'll move back here, see if Dr. Hendricks really could use marketing help. Maybe I'll find something that lets me use my skills for work that actually matters. Maybe I'll just take some time to figure out who I am when I'm not trying to impress anyone." Michael studied her face, looking for signs of insincerity, of the kind of impulsive declaration that would be forgotten once she returned to her real life. "What about your apartment, your career, everything you've built in Chicago? What about it?" "It's just stuff, Michael. Jobs and apartments and achievements. They're not the same thing as a life. They're not the same thing as family." For the first time in 3 years, Michael's expression softened completely. The anger that had been holding his shoulders rigid seemed to drain away, leaving behind exhaustion and something that might have been relief. "I've missed you," he said quietly. "Even when I was furious with you, even when I was writing that letter, I missed my sister." Sarah felt tears threatening again. "I've missed you too, all of you. I've missed home." "Home's still here," Michael said. Messier than it used to be, more complicated, but still here. There's still a place for you if you want it. The reunion continued around them, but Sarah and Michael found themselves in their own bubble of tentative reconciliation. They talked for another hour, carefully at first, then with growing ease as they remembered how to be siblings rather than adversaries. Amy joined them, and then Jake. And for the first time in years, the 4 Mitchell children were in the same room, talking and laughing and beginning the slow process of rebuilding what had been broken. It wouldn't be easy. Trust, once damaged, took time to repair. Patterns established over years couldn't be changed overnight. Sarah would have to prove through consistent action rather than grand gestures that she was serious about changing her priorities. But sitting in the gymnasium, where they'd all started their adult journeys, surrounded by people who'd known them when they were young and full of dreams they couldn't quite articulate, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in years: hope. The reunion ended near midnight, classmates drifting away to hotel rooms or childhood bedrooms or their current adult lives. Sarah found herself in the parking lot with her siblings, not quite ready to say goodbye. "Breakfast tomorrow?" Amy asked. "The kids would love to see you again, and David wants to meet his famous sister-in-law finally." "I'd like that," Sarah said. "I'd like that very much." She hugged each of her siblings. Careful, tentative embraces that carried the weight of everything unsaid and the promise of everything that might still be possible. Driving back to the motel, Sarah thought about her speech, about the faces in the crowd, about the conversations that had followed. For the first time in her professional life, she'd spoken from the heart rather than from a script designed to achieve a specific outcome. She'd been vulnerable rather than polished, honest rather than strategic. It had felt terrifying and liberating in equal measure. In her motel room, Sarah opened her laptop and began typing, "Dear Marcus, I hope you're enjoying your weekend. I know this will come as a surprise, but I need to give you advance notice that I'll be submitting my resignation when I return to Chicago. I'll provide the standard 2 weeks notice and will do everything possible to ensure a smooth transition of my accounts and responsibilities." She wrote for an hour, crafting the most important professional email of her career, the one that would free her to discover what came next. When she finished, she closed the laptop without sending it. Some decisions were too important to make in the aftermath of emotion, even positive emotion. But Sarah knew she would send it. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next week, but soon. The life she'd built in Chicago, successful as it appeared from the outside, no longer fit the person she was becoming. Outside her motel window, Millfield slept peacefully under a canopy of stars you couldn't see in Chicago. Somewhere in this small town, her siblings were probably lying awake too, processing the evening's revelations and wondering if their sister had really changed or if this was just another performance. Sarah understood their skepticism. She'd have to earn their trust back, prove that her realizations weren't just temporary guilt, but genuine transformation. She'd have to show up consistently, be present for the mundane moments as well as the important ones, demonstrate that she valued their relationship more than her career advancement. It would take time. It would require sacrifices she wasn't sure she was ready to make. It would mean redefining everything she'd believed about success and purpose and what constituted a life well lived. But for the first time in years, Sarah felt like she was moving toward something rather than running away from it. She was going home, not just to a place, but to a version of herself she'd almost forgotten existed. The reunion was over, but Sarah Mitchell's real journey was just beginning.